Okay. So, first of all, can you introduce yourself for the coaches in Taiwan?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Keegan Ross. I'm a strength coach and a physical therapist out here at Exos in Phoenix, Arizona.
Cool. So, how long have you been with Exos?
Yeah, I've been here just over 3 years now. So I was coaching at some smaller gyms in Illinois prior to Exos. And then I decided to go to physical therapy school because once I was a coach, I kind of felt like I wanted to be able to help people who are still in pain or like couldn't move certain ways. So I just felt like I needed to learn more. And so I ended up going to grad school for PT school and then continued to coach a lot of like high school and youth athletes. And then was fortunate enough to be able to join Team Exos right after grad school.
Cool. So you went to like the PT school. So is that a reason that you kind of like posted a lot of like injury rehab, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so my position is pretty unique in that like I'm a coach and I help athletes who are completely healthy trying to improve performance, but I'm also a physical therapist, so I can be more on the injury side of things and work with those athletes who are just out of an injury or just out of a surgery and things like that. So it really kind of helps me, do a little bit of everything across the entire continuum, which is one reason why I was really drawn to Exos early, is because it's a company that kind of does everything. They have everything in house between PTs and dietitians and coaches. And so I just felt like the right setting for me. And it's been cool being able to play on both sides of that.
Cool. So, since you're a physical therapist, does that change the way you view performance side of stuff?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've learned being both is that the fundamental principles of how a human being adapts to exercise is the same across the continuum, right? So the difference is like somebody's in pain or has key restrictions because they need to heal or recover from an injury. And so really early on, like PT school kind of helped me understand how to evaluate somebody and be able to figure out the deficits and help me do interventions early and acute, when somebody's fresh out of a surgery. But I think my coaching knowledge really helps me with everything else. Once an athlete's back to kind of health and they can walk and do simple stuff, then it really is about applying exercise to improve basic qualities like strength, power, integrating back to running, integrating back to cutting. And then at some point you have to get them all the way back to playing reactive sport.
Cool. So I know post some of the ACL rehab stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like introducing some of the plyo and like deceleration, that kind of stuff. Can you walk us through how to from let's say an athlete, they just finish their surgery, and how to from there to go back to the performance side?
Absolutely. Love that question. So phase one out of an injury, especially an acute injury like an ACL rehab, you're going to get them pretty early. Your first goal is just establishing health, right? Like you need to reduce pain, you need to reduce swelling, and you have to get them back to like full range of motion and just being able to transfer in and out of a car, walk, do all the basic stuff that they need to do for life first. And so that's really your first goal and priority. And that kind of takes you through roughly 6 to 8 week range potentially. After that, between 8 and 16 weeks, you're really trying to get them good foundational strength so that they can load and absorb force and be able to squat appropriately, be able to do lunges, things like that. And once you do that and they look good, have decent balance, decent strength, you can introduce impact. I believe that's the first key phase to getting somebody back towards higher level things. And so what I like to do is kind of like some of the posts I've shared, introduce like landing via a drop squat or stepping off of a box, something like that, to where the athlete is exposed to impact forces prior to you having them run. And in that phase, I'll take them from something like drop squats to some sort of slow jump, like a non-counter movement where they pause at the bottom and then actually jump. And I'll take them all the way to a similar strategy with a bound where they're standing on one leg, let's say their left leg, and they jump to their right leg and land on the right leg. And so once I get them with the foundational piece of contacts, I feel pretty comfortable that they can handle the impact of running. And we reintroduce running and make sure they can tolerate certain volumes of that prior to worrying about speed. And usually with an ACL rehab, the biggest challenges are getting them to be able to slow down effectively and be able to decelerate effectively, just because of a lot of weakness and inhibition and pain that happens in the front of the knee. So after you get them through that kind of middle stage where they're running and they're able to do that on land with decent volumes, I work into some sort of closed cutting work. Shuffle here, stop there. It's not very reactive. It's pretty basic. And then as you build context and volumes and intensities with those skills, at some point you can transfer those to more sport-like scenarios, right? So I guess an example would be if somebody is comfortable running with some sort of pace and stopping straight ahead. If they were a basketball athlete, they could probably also take a dribble into a jump shot. And so at some point, these drills start to become sport-like scenarios, and it just kind of starts to bleed into what you would normally see as sport. One thing that we are playing with a little bit and that, I'm still learning is how to leverage the force plate to where you have specific data on knowing when they're clear to do certain activities. Maybe it's some sort of eccentric velocity that they can achieve, or some sort of like asymmetry is less than 10% with landing and takeoff. And that's how you can know that they're clear to do the next phases. But that's kind of some of the stuff we're playing with.
Cool. So, like what you just mentioned, how long will the process probably gonna take? Like from finishing the surgery to like getting them back to like the field?
Yeah, that's a great question. Returning to sport is such a gray area. There's so many factors, and it's really a lot of people are involved. The PT, the strength coach, the athlete definitely has to be involved. Are they confident enough to play? Do they feel comfortable? Things like that. But also the coach and everybody else involved there, the medical staff. But in terms of ACLs, it depends on the scenario. It depends on the athlete, but the absolute earliest would be 9 months. And really, it's not even about the time. It's more about if they've demonstrated the qualities and the abilities to actually, demonstrate some sort of force and power capabilities, the ability to actually reactively change directions and be able to like integrate back to sporting like activities. And so usually somewhere between 9 months and a year is when we can accomplish those tasks. But it's also not uncommon for it to be longer than that. I think we commonly just say, hey, it's going to be 9 months. And then athletes and other people hear, oh, it's 9 months no matter what. But, sometimes you have a more complicated surgery or other things happen to where it just takes a long time to develop some of these qualities. And really the important thing is that the athlete is actually physically prepared and can demonstrate that they can handle the demands of sport.
Cool. I also noticed that at Exos, they put a lot of like rotational movement into like multi-directional state, right? So, as a performance coach, also a physical therapist, what are your thoughts on like putting rotational movement into like training athletes?
Yeah, I think it's huge, right? Like the athlete at some point is going to have to be able to tolerate rotation and forces in every direction, especially if you look at all of the common sports. Like they require them to move in all directions from various positions and react to a stimulus to do that. And so, if you were just taking an athlete through just straight playing, just straight running, just straight cutting, then there's definitely going to be some missing pieces there. And then, you know, that's potentially a place they wouldn't be prepared to handle that stress as they return back to sport. And so I think, one, making sure that you expose them to it, but two, making sure you can actually train it and develop qualities in those areas is really important. And then, you know, obviously, like locally, not trying to go down any rabbit holes, but, you know, there's different rotations and things that happen in almost every joint with tons of movements. And so really, even in the straight plane, there's going to be some degree of stress with that, but I think it's largely important.
I noticed that there's a lot of like, I follow a lot, like some of the therapists work in Exos, they post a lot of like rotational movement.
Yeah.
Probably during the off season or just coming back from some sort of injury, that kind of stuff. And they do a lot of like barefoot training.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of people within our company that definitely do a lot of that stuff. Really, you know, that side of it is they're trying to take like the foot and ankle and tie it to how the knee would also move and the hip would move and the T-spine would move. So they're really just trying to connect movement from a local standpoint all the way through a global standpoint.
Cool. So next thing I want to discuss is about speed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know at Exos you guys train a lot of like athlete, and you also do some combine prep, right?
Definitely. Yep.
So for combine prep, the athlete's gonna probably train a lot like linear speed, right? For like 40-yard dash.
Yeah, that's the moneymaker, right? That's the big ticket item. So that's definitely a large importance in our program.
Yeah. So can you walk us through how to like how you guys train athlete during the whole week?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, you know, really with any training goal, speed, strength, returning to sport, it's all starts with your assessment. And so at Exos, we bring athletes in and they go through what we call our athlete experience, where really on day one, they're getting an evaluation with a dietitian, a physical therapist, and a performance coach or strength coach. And so with that, we identify key areas where we can improve this athlete's performance, whether that be body composition, or maybe they can't move well through their hip or ankle or something like that. And then with the coach, you know, we get to get them on the force plates and see, can they produce power overall? Can they produce it quickly? Are they super bouncy or elastic? Do they have like a high RSI? And then with those things, and even also looking at like their speed, obviously, if we're going to talk about the 40-yard dash, we got to know how fast they are when they come in the door, right? So we get all of that information and we decide where the weak links are. And then we try to target those things specifically. So, you know, sometimes the dietitian is honestly the best speed coach because maybe an athlete is just a little heavy and they're not going to run fast when they're heavy, right? So making sure they're listening to our dietitian, the meal plan, things like that, and obviously training too. But some of those things end up being just as important as the field work. And so in combine, the schedule generally looks like a linear speed day on Monday, potentially a linear speed day on Tuesday, if not a multi-directional day on Tuesday, another top end speed movement on Wednesday, a multi-direction on Thursday, and then another linear speed movement Friday. So 3 to 4 linear speed movement sessions during the week are happening.
So there's 3 or 4 days for linear speed. So how do you do like programming for speed? Is it like do you do like starting on the Monday and probably like some Excel on Wednesday and I don't know. What does it look like?
Yeah. So usually a general layout would be like acceleration on Monday and Friday for sure. If we add in another linear speed day on Tuesday or Thursday, it's probably also acceleration. And then that Wednesday is usually our top end speed day. And so a huge piece of the 40 is having a great start. Another huge piece is being able to actually carry your speed and finish through the whole 40-yard. So, you know, we definitely devote a lot of time to the front half because it's a skill, learning how to get an aggressive angle to be able to snap out of the start, And then the back half is just our highest risk. So we're usually doing that around 1 time a week. It's also the most taxing on the body too, right? Like trying to run full speed. You can't carry that out multiple days all the time. You know, so there's technical days and there's high speed effort days too.
So is there like going to be like how many like how do you program like how do you program for speed? Is it like, let's say like a 10 yards dash for like a day, or like I don't know?
Yeah. So I think at first, right, it's kind of phased out, just like the weight room would be, right? Like you gotta teach a technique, you gotta make sure that they understand keys to, you know, what we're trying to coach and what it should look like and things like that. And so we will have those phases where we're just teaching them the appropriate leg actions, the appropriate postures, you know, how to actually attack the ground. And then we'll also have the phases where we're really trying to improve overall speed. And I think where we can get specific is based on the assessment that we did earlier. You know, if an athlete is already really good at producing high force really quickly out of a start from a standstill, right? They don't need to like load into it at all. Then we might not have to try to improve that a ton. Maybe that's already one of their strengths, but maybe one of their weaknesses is that they're not very elastic and that they can't transfer force off the ground really well. And so we would then give that person a lot more like fast contacts, like continuous plyometric variations for the back half. And so, you know, obviously it's going to depend, but in general, it's going to be some of those fine tweaks with that. But in terms of like the actual field session, you know, maybe an athlete will definitely get a lot of practice with their 3-point starts set up. And that's going to be on our acceleration days. We do leverage timing for 0 to 20 yards, 0 to 10 yards, something in that range, to try to get the athletes to, one, compete against each other in a group, which really drives intent and effort, but 2, to also track progress. And then on the back half days, they'll do what we usually do is a flying 20. And so they'll get 20 yards to run into it, and then we'll time the back half. And again, it's driving intent within the session, because then each athlete goes and the other athlete knows what that athlete got before them. So they're trying to compete with each other, but then it's also a way for us to track progress. And throughout all of these sessions, we're constantly collecting film to where we can educate the athlete on the technical demands. And so we'll review that film with them throughout the week and show them like, hey, this is what you're doing, this is what we want it to look like, etc. But I think in terms of like actually training, it's really the maybe 3 or 4 big buckets of, 1, the nutrition and body comp and making sure those things are happening. 2, the technical components or movement qualities, like, you know, from a rehab perspective, maybe somebody had an ankle sprain during the season and they can't get into ankle dorsiflexion. And if you can't get into ankle dorsiflexion, you can't get an aggressive shin angle in your start, which means you're likely not going to have as an aggressive projection out. And so maybe a big thing for them is just cleaning up their ankle mobility and strength. And then lastly would be more the performance aspect, you know, making sure that they can produce enough power from a starting position and also transfer force really well with the back half.
Cool. Sorry. So how long was the combine prep? Is it like 8 weeks or like 12 weeks?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the calendar year, but standard programs usually around 8 weeks. Guys will usually roll in right after the first of the year in January. And then combine is usually that last week of February, first week of March timeframe. So,
yeah, cool. So, usually how fast? I mean, yeah, how fast are you gonna get throughout those 8 weeks?
Yeah. So, I think I could be wrong about this. You know, my role within combine has been everything from assistant coach behind John Barlow, who I believe you talked to recently, to like just PT. So they can flex me a lot. And so Nick Hill is our speed coach. He's been our speed coach out here for a while, so he would be more familiar with these exact numbers. But my understanding is our improvement is usually at least 1/10 to 2/10 of a second, sometimes more, which doesn't maybe sound like a lot, but in 40 yards, that's pretty significant.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, and in 8 weeks, that's a big change. But
that's crazy.
You also, got to remember that these are already very talented and gifted athletes.
Very elite athlete.
They're already great performers. And so really that's where like that athlete experience and the eval is so important, because when you're already a great athlete, you can't just like shotgun approach it and give them everything. That you need a potent dose, like almost like sniper fire of like, this is the variable that needs to change. And so that eval, the experience we have with the process, all of those things really helps us like dial in on the athlete's program to change the variables that need to change.
Cool. That's a lot, like 2/10 of a second. That's kind of crazy for 8 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many changes. Even like the bench press numbers, their body composition, like it's just cool to like see them enter, and they're like nervous, excited. They've heard about us, but they don't really know. And then they get to know us, and you just develop the relationship with the athlete, and like you just grow with them in this process. And it's always really cool to see the transformation.
Cool. So I also noticed that you also train basketball player.
Yes.
So what it's like to train basketball player? Yeah,
it's really fun. Yeah. So after John Barlow transitioned out, I now took over the NBA offseason program. And so it's a really good group of guys. I grew up playing basketball. It's one of my favorite sports. And so it's similar to other athletes, right? Like you got to understand them, understand their needs, understand the demands of the sport, be able to do some sort of evaluation process to know where they're at, and then understand their goals and what they're trying to do, So some guys maybe just want to be durable, recover, get ready and healthy for the season. Other guys are playing for a contract. Maybe they're a G League guy or a 10-day guy, and they're like, I got to break through and get my spot on the team. And so the off season has different looks for everybody, but in general, basketball players usually get a ton of time on the court, a ton of time with like velocity and speed-based stimulus, and usually a little less time during the season with the weight room. And so early on, I'm starting the guys with 1, getting healthy, but 2, not a ton of plyos, not a ton of speed work, like get them healthy and like spend some time in the weight room, redeveloping some fundamental qualities of strength. And then as we transition back towards the season, you got to make sure they're exposed to contacts, plyometrics, things of that nature to get them ready for the demands of the court. But the one thing I've learned is that basketball athletes never have a problem going to the gym and playing pickup. So even in the off season, they're in the gym playing pickup, getting exposure to that. So I'm just respecting that they're already getting that stimulus somewhere and just putting less of it in my program early on.
Cool. I saw you put some like hill elevated single leg squat, right?
Yeah, I was doing some isometrics, just some floating heel isometrics. It was in our warm up. Yeah, I like some of that work. One, a lot of basketball players have like patellar tendonitis or like just general like anterior knee limitations. And early off season, an isometric is one way. It's not the only way, but it's one way to easily get some sort of stimulus for that. And then 2, I really like the floating heel because it puts a little bit of demand on the soleus, and your quad and your soleus are 2 big decelerators, but also like soleus is going to be huge just for that lower foot health, lower foot ankle health. So it's a simple exercise that I like to include in the warm up for the guys.
Cool. So are you gonna, as it progress, are you gonna like load the single leg hill elevated squat?
Yeah. So that was like I said, just in their warm up. So their warm up usually is like some mobility work, especially for the hips and ankles, and then some sort of like isometric work for like the lower foot and knee health. And then I expose them to some jump roping, some like deceleration work. And then phase 1, like I said, is really the key days are like lower body strength, upper body strength, another lower body strength day early, and then upper body volume. Some guys are usually trying to put on a little bit of weight after they've lost from the season. And so those are kind of our big 4 themes throughout the week. But as we get closer to the season, which around now, end of July towards the beginning of August, we'll start to transition to where there's only one lower body strength day, and the other day turns into like a speed power day. So it's going to be faster movements, trying to express force quickly, and then lots of plyometrics and some speed work just to get them back and used to sprinting and stopping. But yeah, rear foot elevateds and trap bar deadlifts are common in the program throughout the whole phase.
Cool. So one thing that is, I think, like all sports has in common is like they all have a lot of like hamstring injury, right?
Yeah.
So from your role, I don't want to use prevent, so how would you like decrease the chance for an athlete to get like hamstring injury?
For sure. Yeah, I think it goes back to our athlete experience intake process is step 1. From a rehab side of things, the therapist in the situation would evaluate them and get their history. We know that a history of an injury before is like the biggest risk factor for future injury. But it's also a factor that you can't really change. Like you can't change that you've been injured in the past. So it just is what it is. You can't modify that variable. And so it's good to know though, because then you need to dial in on those areas maybe a little bit more. If an athlete is like, hey, yeah, I've had 3 hamstring strains, you're probably going to try to do everything you can with other variables to make sure they're good to go. Outside of that, when they're meeting with the dietitian, we could talk about the importance of hydration, especially before court work, after court work, things like that. And then performance-wise, they're going to get an evaluation with the Nordic hamstrings, Nordic isos. And so we'll get to see force capabilities. With that assessment, you can see rate and you can see peak. And so it's really nice to know, hey, maybe this athlete is strong enough, but he can't do it fast enough. And so maybe we do an intervention that's more speed-based, or maybe there's a large asymmetry. I have one guy this offseason who has a hamstring asymmetry of like 30%. And so this exact scenario is something we're currently working on, and he has had a history of hamstring strains. And, we're doing a ton of eccentric strengthening in various positions with the hip flexed and both the hip extended, just to address all the positions that the hamstring would be in. But I think it's a tricky process. And I think you just got to start with, can the hamstring do what it needs to do? And then can you tie the hamstring doing what it needs to do with global activities such as sprinting, jumping for a rebound or dunk or whatever it may be, and exposing them to those demands as they improve with the local qualities of hamstring strength.
So, like what I just mentioned, you mentioned like Nordic curl, and like basically like no matter like eccentric or concentric or isometric strengthening, like in every like possibility like length or like which kind of situation they're going to be, right?
Right. Yep. Definitely.
So, besides like hamstring strain, what is the most common injury you see in Exos?
Oh man, we get so many like sport and orthopedic injuries. I mean, everything from ankle sprains to hamstring strains, even like adductor and quad strains, to just general low back or hip pain, rotator cuff tears or shoulder impingement, and our baseball players, elbow injuries. Like there's really honestly all the common sport injuries we see, but I feel like I have seen a ton of lower extremity injuries since I've been there. A lot of hamstring strains, a lot of adductor strains, and I've treated a lot of ACLs and ankle sprains. Those are probably like some of the most common ones that I see, but I've also seen all the other ones too.
Cool. So that's kind of like all the questions I have for like performance.
Yeah.
So next thing I want to ask is, like since your role in Exos, you sometimes work as PT, right? And sometimes work at performance coach. right? So like in the past 3 years in Exos, which like role is you like it more?
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a challenging question. People always ask me that, and I always have a tough time answering because it's like, I'm at the point where it's almost the same thing to me. Like, I guess to give you a firm answer and answer the question, I'm always going to be a coach first. And I think that's an important distinction for me because I think that makes me a better therapist because I understand communication. I understand how athletes think and feel. I understand how to conduct exercise in a group. I understand how exercise can be applied to improve performance. And sometimes like PT school doesn't really teach you that stuff, unfortunately. And I think it's a huge missed area, but it's just the reality of the situation. And so, but really the whole process is just context is different. Like as a PT, I'm getting an athlete who is in the context of pain and has a goal of improving back to what they used to be able to do. But with performance, the athlete is healthy and they have a goal of improving in some area of performance in their life. And so really both of those scenarios allow me to assess an athlete, build trust with an athlete, and apply exercise to improve and achieve our goal. So really like at this point, maybe it's just my viewpoint, but I think it's very similar fields, kind of almost the same job, just different context and maybe a few other hands-on tools that a PT would use over a coach.
So eventually you still want to be like a performance coach, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, I am a strength coach now. So, you know, it's interesting with the role, kind of like we talked about, it'll change throughout the season. I've been fortunate enough to be just a coach and just a PT or like 50-50. Like I might like this summer, my schedule has pretty much been treat somebody, coach 3 groups, treat 1 or 2 people. Like, so I go just PT, coach, PT, and it just flows throughout the day. But I've also been in situations where a team will trust me with an athlete to rehab them and coach them. And I'm just with that athlete one-on-one. And I take them from injury or rehab right through into performance. And that happens within a session. And so, yeah, I really like being able to apply both of those things and just trying to continue to grow as a practitioner.
Yeah. So as a coach, which element of like the, let's say probably like speed or like strength or like Olympically, which is the most favorite thing you like?
Yeah. I think I really enjoy coaching all of it, but I think if I had to pick one, I'd put a little bit more with the speed and movement. Just because it's such a underutilized area, I feel like, you know, like everybody thinks of our field as the weight room, which is largely important. I love the weight room just as much as anybody else. But like when you see a skilled movement coach and they understand how to improve movement skills and tie it to a sport, like it's just next level. So I would put that one.
I thought speed is big right now in the state.
Oh, it definitely is. I think it's growing. I just mean in general, like from when I first started, I feel like a lot of gyms wouldn't really do it. And it's definitely evolving and growing and a lot more people are doing it. But I think it's still just such a huge area.
So do you want to like, so you would love to like train more about speed, right? I saw you post a lot of speed training on Instagram.
Yeah, I definitely like that stuff. It's fun, especially with rehab. Like, you know, obviously performance wise, it's catching on, but rehab wise, there's not a lot of, obviously there are therapists out there that do it and it's growing and things like that, but it's not necessarily commonplace in the physical therapy world at the general level. Maybe not so much in pro sports and higher ups is going to happen, but in the general, like private sector, it's not really as common as you would think. And it's unfortunate, you know, it's a huge missed opportunity, I think, with our athletes and patients. So,
yeah, like last year I started training track myself.
Yeah.
And I literally pulled my hamstring like 3 times during this year.
Oh man. Yeah, it's never fun. I feel like you get sniped trying to run down the track.
Yeah, and like had to go to like to the therapist and kind of had to explain like why and how I got injured and how I want to go back. There's kind of like a gap between like performance and there's kind of like a gap between performance and therapist. And when it comes to like speed or like field movement, I think the gap's larger.
Agreed. And that's one reason why I love that so much, because there's huge opportunity there for growth for our industry. But also, like, as a patient, then that makes it hard, right? Because you don't know, like, you want to go back to sprinting and not have pain, and you're seeking a therapist to help you do that. But if the therapist doesn't know how to do that, then how do you do that? You know?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
It is hard.
Yeah, cool. So that's kind of like all the questions I have for today. Okay. So
awesome. Yeah, Eric.
If the audience if maybe some of the coaches who are interested in what we are talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, Instagram is going to be best. The handle would be Keegan, KeeGan _ Ross, ROSS _ DPT.
Cool. Appreciate it, man. Appreciate it for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. It was a pleasure.